what wants to be talked about right now is identity. Identity in the negative space. I don't mean negative in the sense of shadow or like shadow in the way that it's commonly perceived of like difficult darkness, pain, suffering, like what's hidden in our fear space. Although that could be identity in the negative, but more what wants to be pointed to is like the identification that happens in the opposite of what feels forward facing in our world, like a film photography before there was digital. When we got our photos developed, or we developed them ourselves, and we had the photograph that's printed and it looks like me, looks like my face, my coloring. And then somewhere in the envelope or the canister, there are the negatives, where light impacts the chemicals on the negatives to be the opposite coloring of what actually gets developed. That process is happening when we become identified. And it feels important somehow right now in the climate that we're living in, not any more important than any other moment, but it feels salient in that so much of what we're processing and experiencing on a global level in this like collective nervous system that's in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or dissociation or panic or overwhelm, or maybe regulation. Some of that is definitely happening, but the identity on a global level, the identification of Democrats or liberals or conservatives or Americans or Europeans or humans or animals, like that forward-facing identity has a very real impact. In the collective ways in which we support each other and ourselves, as do the negatives. And what do I mean by the negatives? Let me see if I can find the words. By the way, I think it's compelling to point out like identity on the collective level is the same as identity on the individual level, in that it still exists. We're still in a dualistic world and non-dual realization that, like, yeah, I'm not just an American. I'm not just from Virginia. I'm not just my name and my body's temperature and like all of these things, but I also am. And it's not about transcending that necessarily in this process of shifting identity. more so, it's not being defined. Not believing that any one aspect of these separates me from anyone else or limits how this life will or won't be in the next moment, in the next moment, in the next moment, in the moment when this body ends and I truly am no longer an American or an individual in that way. So that was an aside. To come back to the negatives. My phone's going off somewhere and I don't want to find it right now. So it can be more obvious when something solidifies in us in one direction than another. And so whatever role I'm playing in this moment, like that tends to be the positive film image that the sky is blue, the car's driving in its regular green color, the grass is green, the dog is brown, like the role of what I am in that moment can feel like the most obvious contraction of identity and the most obvious form of struggle of being resistant to this ever-shifting, expressive form of life. And any awareness turned towards unconscious identification is going to be liberating in some capacity. Not liberating in the way that like flips the switch and we're free. Not liberating in the way that the mind thinks liberation is, but without going into like a whole other exploration of liberation. I'm just gonna say that. And there's often the negative space that can be unexamined. And I think this is really well, I'll just say it's really alive right now for myself and for a lot of those that I'm working with in these global shifts that feel so intense and are very intense. That finding and seeing and making space for the negative identity allows the movement of life to free up a little differently. So it feels like hate is a pretty strong anchor for a lot of folks right now. There's a lot of contraction around like pick your person or system of choice that you experience hate around. Like it's very easy even here to access that just by consuming any kind of polarizing content, whether it's news or social media or gossip, or like, I'm not saying that there's not humanizing sources out there, but I'm pointing to the ones that really incite hate and fear. Like, hook into that, and like the natural experience of hate Like you can feel it. It's the contraction. Like you can feel it harden in the heart. Like I hate him so much. It's dense. It's really dense. And it's not personal either. It's this collective, right? This real reinforced, not actually about that person, not about me, but the energy of that hatred digested in this individual nervous system. Like, it feels like a rock in your shoe or a boulder. To feel into that as the identity, the I don't even have terms for it, the positive identity on the picture that gets printed, like I'm the one that hates. I'm the one that's hating. And then the layers underneath of that may be less obvious. That whatever I'm defining myself as, there is a negative space in which I'm defining myself as not that. I'm the one that hates. I'm the one that hates that powerful person, that person in power. And what opposes that? Where is the identity? If I have to be this, then I also have to not be this. And that's where we can start to shift and feel and stay with, okay, so what is it with hatred? Okay, then I'm not the one that feels love or compassion. If I'm the one that's subjected to power, then I'm the one that has no power. I'm powerless. If I'm the one that feels cynicism, then I'm the one that has no tenderness. Right? So whatever we're defining and portraying out here that can feel so real and all defining, like when we find the negative space, the opposing color that we're not, that identity is saying that we're not, the negatives really show us our vantage point, how limited that view is, how limited and actually unreal. Am I really powerless? Am I really incapable of love and tenderness? And it's not a technique. I'm not suggesting a certain kind of practice necessarily, but what I do know about identity is that when we see it happening, when we feel identification and turn towards it, like slow down, and this is like metaphorically, you don't have to actually slow down, but like whatever turning towards means for you, it might be closing the eyes and feeling, it might be sitting down and taking a breath, it might be to stop avoiding with the distraction and to actually notice, wow, this contraction is single-pointedly hardening around the one that hates, the one that's powerless, the one that's afraid, the one that's not tender, the one that is so certain and intolerant of uncertainty. Like all of those singularities, when you really look, like what's there right now in the positive or the negative? Like start with what's most obvious. I'm the one that's uncertain. I'm the one that's hopeless. I'm the one that's been attacked. I'm the one that's going to save everyone. I'm the one that's vulnerable. And when we make some space, when there's an okayness of just honoring that this is here, and there's no longer resistance, there's no longer like a shutting down out of a not okay nervous system, but there can be some safety around what's here in identity, then it might soften enough to also see the negative. I'm the one that can't handle this. I'm the one that can't do anything. I'm the one that has to disconnect. I'm the one that has to escape. I'm the one that has to fight. Whatever it is, like often the negative feeling into that, the safety, the okayness, it's not a problem right now. Of course, this artificial solidity of who I am in this moment is going to be artificial, and its polarities are going to feel reorienting because they're seen as just poles in the ground that life is dancing around, that life sees and experiences harm and not okayness and tries to get some sort of footing to either be on the offense or the defense. And then hide and keep fighting because there is actually no footing. And so we fight and resist the lack of footing, and it's just uncomfortable. And then there's just identity on identity on identity. Like, okay. And at a certain point, we can wake up to all of it. That it's okay that those identities are rippling out, that seeing them gives space to not be controlled by them, to not just fall in line as this unconscious person that, of course, I'm not going to do anything because I'm powerless. That's who I am. Of course, I'm just going to consume something that feels toxic because I'm the passive one. Or, of course, I'm going to lash out and attack because I'm not safe. It's not that any of these movements don't have their place in the moment they may rightfully arise in. But turning towards all the facets of identity that we see constellated internally and externally, that turning towards is really radical. Like on an individual level, that looks like really being empowered because I'm not defined by either who I'm supposed to be or who I'm not supposed to be. And I'm free to really respond to what's happening. on a collective level, that looks like a lot of confusion. Because collectively, we're used to being identified. And it looks like humanity, because collectively we're used to dehumanizing. I see both happening right now, which is also the beautiful paradox of life, of like how much destruction and dehumanizing and pain and not okay, and how this is waking people in a certain way, if they're ready to not be defined and not be stuck. And to listen rather than follow orders. To move from inner truth and knowing rather than this identity and role that was handed down.